Hello, good evening and welcome. I just moved into my new apartment here and I finished a few days ago unloading all of my vinyl records and my books. All along down this wall here I have all my bookshelves and vinyl record shelves. It was a very tedious work. I was doing it all by myself. I had to carry it all up 2 flights of stairs. I am living on the 3rd floor in a building that has no elevator in the extreme Midwestern heat that we're dealing with. And I think what I want to do now is I want to show off some of my vinyl records. So I was originally living in northern Illinois, and I had all my vinyl records, well, half of my vinyl records there, and the other half were sitting in my mom's basement elsewhere. And for the first time in over about 5 or 6 years, all of my vinyl records are now reunited. They're all together in the same building. I sort of want to take advantage of this fact to show off some of my vinyl records here. So I don't think I'm going to do all of them in just one video because that would take a while. I might split it up into doing just individual shelves. Maybe I might start out with the bottom shelf here, because otherwise my voice would get very tired and hoarse. So the first album I have here on the shelf is Sufficiently Breathless by Captain Beyond. This is their second of a total of 3 albums that they made. Their first album was very forward-thinking, kind of intricate hard rock. It was pretty good. Second album's a lot more straightforward and basic. That's not to say that it's awful. It's pretty decent. The title track of this album is really phenomenal. I like it quite a bit. It's pretty good, but I would definitely recommend checking out their first album, which I have in here somewhere. I have Maggot Brain by Funkadelic. Not a huge funk person, but this album is just so fantastic. It's they also operate under the name Parliament as well. It's this is a reissue from I don't know when, maybe about 10 years ago. It's a really great album. I knew this was cool when I listened to the first track. They opened up with a 10-minute guitar solo. I was hooked pretty quickly. The whole album is great though. Next album here I have is a reissue of I guess a French progressive jazz rock album, The World of Genius Hans by The Moving Gelatin Plates. This is I think they have 4 albums. I think they recorded one album where their name was just Moving. This is pretty good. It's extremely intricate jazz rock. It's really crazy sounding. I don't know what else to say about it apart from that. If you like really crazy, intricate jazz rock, then that's pretty much the gold standard right there as far as I'm concerned. I have a self-titled album, the self-titled album by the Federal Duck. It's I don't know, like late '60s, kind of like a I guess say kind of like slow, light psychedelic music. It's pretty good. I think the band comes from Pennsylvania, and I don't know if they made anything else other than this album. It's decent. Is it essential? Probably not. I have Foxtrot by Genesis, a personal favorite album from Genesis. It's got that 24-some-minute track, Supper's Ready. This is a really fantastic album. I really like the art on this. This does seem to be an original copy. I don't know if it's a first pressing, but highly recommended. If you're already really into prog, then you probably already know about it. I have the the only album by the band Tomorrow. This is from 1967. Really, really great psychedelic pop album. It's I like it a lot. You may know this band because they were contemporaries of the early incarnation of Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett, and they played at the same UFO club that they did. The guitarist on this album is a guy named Steve Howe, who would later go on to join Yes by the time that they made their third album. So it's got that going for it. The drummer is a guy named Twink, who would go on to, play drums for a number of kind of like highly regarded albums, such as SF Sorrow by the Pretty Things and I guess Never Neverland by the Pink Fairies, to name a few. Twink also had a really good solo album called Think Pink, so pretty cool. It's all around great. I had something else profound to say about this too. This is a reissue, of course. I think original mono versions of this album from 1967 go for $1,000 easily. It's on that Parlophone label, and I think if you're familiar with John Peel, the BBC radio broadcaster, his he did this show I think called Top Gear, where he brought in a bunch of really cool underground musicians once a week. Up from 1967 till the time he died of cancer in 2004. This was the very first band to ever get like one of those Top Gear John Peel sessions. So that's pretty cool. I have a reissue of this Second Caravan album. If I could do it all over again, I'd do it all over you. Very cool, whimsical British prog rock. I think this probably leans more psychedelic than prog, but it's a pretty solid album, I would say. This is a reissue from Four Men with Beards. That record label, as far as I can tell from perusing Discogs, isn't super highly regarded, but I think some of their albums are sort of like legally dubious as to whether they're bootlegs, and the sound quality has been criticized for some of their releases. It's been a while since I listened to that on vinyl, so I can't really comment as to the quality of that particular album. I have It's a Beautiful Day, self-titled album. It's really, really, really fantastic. Especially side 2. If I could rank not albums but sides of albums, I'd say side 2 of this album is one of my favorites. I think the guy who sings and does vocals, and he also plays violins, David LaFlamme, I think he was like a classically trained violinist who was in, I guess, like the Utah Symphonic Orchestra or whatever, but he was a pretty serious violinist, and it's a very good kind of like I guess that canyon sound that's associated with the 60s psychedelic pop people from the West Coast. Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. It's a really great album. If you like prog rock, and there's nothing for me to say about that. It's one of their better albums for sure. One of my more recent acquisitions. This is Public Image Limited's first album, but this has a bunch of remixes of alternative mixes of some of their songs from this album, and I think they also include a certain mix of Swan Lake, which I believe was on the second album. It's pretty cool. I don't have an original copy of this album with the original mix, which I would like to get soon, but I think this was reissued for a record store day just this year, as a matter of fact. A reissue of Faust 4 by Faust, of course. This is a pretty cool album. It's pretty good. Although I think I prefer Faust's first album and their the third album, the Faust tapes, a bit more to this. But I think the album cover is really cool. It's all just blank staff lines, which is a really cool idea for an album cover. I have a copy of Uriah Heep's first album with this. I think this has been reissued under, issued under different names and different album covers. This is kind of tacky, alternative version of this album where it's, I think it's called, Very Heavy, Very Humble, and it's like some sort of, the album cover is some sort of picture of this guy with like cobwebs in his face or something, but I prefer this album cover quite a bit more strongly because that album artwork is just so fantastic. The music itself is pretty basic, kind of like organ-driven bluesy rock music. I prefer their later material to this album, but it's nice having on its own just because of the album art itself. I have a reissue of Aphrodite's Child, 666, the third and final album. This is really fantastic. One of my favorite albums of all time, quite frankly. I mean, this is all just music sort of revolving around the theme of the Book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, and it's really fantastic. I think this is a reissue from Music on Vinyl, although I don't know if it shows very clearly, but it's already getting some serious ring wear. I should probably put these in like those plastic little sleeves, but well. One of the really cool things is it's got a picture of some sort of a car crash happening, a painting of a car crash on the inside, which is really cool. I think the Brazilian edition of this album uses this painting as the actual cover. I have the German band Jane, their third album, Jane 3. It's pretty, basic, ordinary, sort of, it's a little bit trippy, but it's, mostly like hard rock leaning. This is a U.S. release on Capitol Records, which is, I guess, interesting that this would even be released in the U.S. It's a decent album, I would say. Got the live album by the Velvet Underground, 1969. Happy to have that. I'd say probably the Velvet Underground is probably my favorite band. Have a reissue on Wah Wah Records, which I believe is a reissue label based out of Spain. It's Paradiswart's Duel by Amon Düül. I guess there's two bands, Amon Düül and Amon Düül 2. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I think it originally started out as Amon Düül, and they made one album, sort of kind of like just kind of like freeform guitar playing with sort of like tribalistic drum beatings, and so I guess some of the more talented members of the band wanted to make some more cohesive music, so they formed Amon Düül 2, and they made some really, really trippy music, whereas I guess the original, I guess the quote-unquote less talented members of the original incarnation of the band just kept recording under this name, Amon Düül. And most of the music that they make is kind of just like, I guess kind of like free-form, improvised, just, drum beating and, guitar playing. And if you go on like Rate Your Music, there's a bunch of people just talking smack about this, because I think most of the people who are checking out this kind of music are just prog rock fans who were expecting something really beautiful and intricate, or something like that, and they're kind of like flabbergasted to listen to something much more laid back like this. And I think the band is sort of overhated in this sense, because if you just want something that's kind of like nice for background music, this the music that this band makes is actually pretty good to that end, I would say. This album, though, is kind of a change of pace for them. It's mostly just them doing, I guess, kind of like sort of light psychedelic folk, what you might call acid folk. It's a people tend to agree that this is their best album, and I'd say it's pretty good myself. Got Future Days by Can. It's a reissue from Spoon Records, I guess the the official label that Can started. It's a classic album. Very beautiful. The sidelong track at the second side, Bel Air, is one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard, I would say. Got a reissue of Easter Everywhere by the 13th Floor Elevators, another classic album from that International Artists label, despite being called International Artists. I think they only ever had about 8 bands on the label, and they were all from Texas. This is a reissue where it's printed on gold-colored vinyl. I like the third album, Bull of the Woods, quite a bit better, but this is still a very, very solid album. I've got a copy of Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd, my personal favorite Pink Floyd album. This is the stereo mix. I also have a mono mix of this same album because the mono mix of this album is just quite a bit superior. I've got George Harrison's second solo album. This is Electronic Sound, released on the Zapple label. This is a reissue, I think. I can't remember how this was reissued. It was originally issued on the very short label Zapple, which was, I guess, a subsidiary of Apple Records. And I think they created this just so that John Lennon could release his really crazy experimental stuff. This album is very weird. I think George Harrison got a hold of one of the very first Moog synthesizers, and he just like playing around with it. It's very freeform, very abstract. If you're a Beatles fan, you probably wouldn't like that very much. You'd probably only like it if you like weird experimental stuff like I do. I've got a fairly early copy of We're Only In It For The Money by Frank Zappa. This is probably my favorite album from Zappa. I've listened to quite a bit of his stuff, but he just has such a large volume of material. I haven't been able to even go through like the I don't think I've even been through the majority of it. But yeah, this is a very classic album, very, very trippy. I've got a Big Star, Radio City. It's a reissue I got from a record store in Illinois. Kind of like basic run-of-the-mill power pop. Rolling Stone magazine just seems to absolutely love these guys. And just belabor how they never got the attention that they deserved, which is certainly true. I don't know who's writing the songs in this, but they're very, very good songs at that. I've got really fun album here, the Holy Mole Rounders. The album is called The Moray Eels Eat the Holy Mole Rounders. Really trippy, psychedelic hippie folk made by old school beatniks who are on way too much amphetamines. It's a pretty fun album. It's from 1967. And I think the way I heard about this album, I think, was around like 2020-ish, and I was kind of feeling sort of like tired of all the ordinary music I was listening to, and I needed something very, very fresh. So I just went on Google and I Googled weirdest albums ever, and this is one of the albums that came up, and it is pretty weird. I've got some sort of American promotional copy of You by Gong. Gong's a pretty good band. They've made, dozens of albums, and most of them are pretty good. They are pretty consistent, but at the same time they are very, very weird. And I think maybe the first time I listened to this I was kind of disgusted, but I've grown to really like it, and a lot of people will tell you that this is probably the best Gong album. And I like Flying Teapot a little bit better. Got a reissue of Revolver by the Beatles. There's nothing I can say about this that hasn't already been said. Release of an Oath by the Electric Prunes. I think that this is their third album. They made two albums. I think one was self-titled and the other one was called Underground. Mostly just run-of-the-mill kind of psychedelic pop, I would say. But I think here they sort of took a turn to having a more of a kind of like a religious vibe, sort of as sort of like a 13th century Catholic, Roman Catholic monk feel to it. Pretty good. There's some very good guitar work on this album, and it's not half bad, but it is definitely very unique. I've got Godspeed You Black Emperors, a 2021 album. I like this a lot. When this came out, 2021, a lot of people on the internet, music critics and the like on Rate Your Music have some sort of, negative stuff to say about this album. But, I think it's pretty good. I like it a lot. Maybe not as good as, Yankee UXO or Lift Your Skinny Fist Like Antennas to Heaven, but it's, Cliff's Gaze towards the end of the album is a really fantastic song. Some kind of psychedelic hippie acid folk from the UK in the early 70s. This is On the Shore by Trees, their second album. This is a reissue, of course, because I think the original copies, again, go for several hundreds of dollars. Second album by Mike Oldfield, Hergest Ridge. It's a pretty good album. I know there's a few different, there's at least two different mixes of this album, because I think the original mix of this album, I think Mike Oldfield was under a lot of time pressure, and I think only maybe about a year or two afterwards he went back into the studio and actually took time on the mix. I don't remember what version this was, but it's a pretty good album. Not as good as his first album, Tubular Bells, but that's such a high mark to me that I wouldn't be able to hold that against him for missing that. Live at Greenwich Village by Albert Ayler. This is a very, very good album if you're into free jazz. I actually picked this up at a flea market of all places, and this was kind of sitting on my shelf for about a year or two before I had the stones to listen to it, and it just immediately blew my socks off. Very, very good album if you're into free jazz, which admittedly is a pretty small subset of the population. Live at Max's Kansas City by the Velvet Underground, another one of their live albums. I think this is like a reissue from like the 80s. It's not an original copy, I don't think, but the Velvet Underground generally sounds pretty good live, I would say. I know that some more recent reissues of this album are on double LP. This is not one of those. This is just the single LP with the original track listing of A Young Person's Guide to King Crimson. This is some sort of compilation that King Crimson put out, and I think maybe in like the late 70s, early 80s. There's some pretty interesting tracks on this compilation. So there's Groon, which was the B-side to their single Cat Food. And I believe that this is probably the first time that Groon ever showed up on an LP. There's an interesting remix of I Talk to the Wind, where they have a woman singing, Judy Geibel, I guess, who was in an early incarnation of the band before they released their first album. Pretty interesting, I would say. Old Loves Die Hard by Triumvirate. German progressive rock band. Pretty organ heavy. They made quite a few albums. This one's pretty good. I like Illusions on a Double Dimple quite a bit better, though. It'll All Work Out in Boomland by T2. Really fantastic album cover. This is a reissue from A Karma, and this is a pretty solid album. So I guess it's like a power trio. I guess this is from 1970, and I guess what you might call proto-progressive rock. It has really long, drawn-out songs, but it's not really quite progressive rock in the way that you typically associate it with, like, Yes or Genesis. But very, very good. I think this is another one of those albums that they didn't make very many copies of originally, so now you have to pay several $100s if you want an original copy. Reissue of the first Doors album. Pretty sure this is a stereo mix. Ravi Shankar live in New York. Really good, really important sitar player if you're into Indian classical. First album by The Move. Move is pretty much unheard of in the United States as far as I understand. But this band had Roy Wood, Bev Bevan and Jeff Lynne. I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing the drummer's name right, but they were, the original founding members for Electric Light Orchestra, which, initially started out as a side project for The Move. The Move, though, although they're pretty much unheard of in the United States, they were pretty famous in the UK. They had a bunch of hit singles there, and this is their first album, which was pretty good, I would say. I don't think Jeff Lynne was in the band yet. I think he came on a little bit later. I think he was currently recording with a band called The Idle Race. So yeah, that's a good album. Continental Circus by Gong. This is a very, very weird album. So they had Gong do the soundtrack for some sort of, I guess, a biopic about an Australian motorcycle racer, but that biopic was done in France. It's pretty weird. This was like a reissue from maybe about 10 years ago, and it just strikes me as so weird that they would bring a band like Gong in to make any soundtrack at all, let alone one about motorcycle racing. It's decent, but it is a soundtrack, so it kind of lacks the cohesion of most of their other records. Phaedra, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, by Tangerine Dream, kind of ambient. What do you say? I guess kind of like ambient, organ-heavy, progressive rock. From I guess Tangerine Dream being German. Kind of a classic album if you're into this kind of stuff and into progressive rock. I bought this quite a while ago, and it took me kind of a while to learn to appreciate Tangerine Dream because of just how ambient they are. But I've been listening to this album more recently, and I am starting to appreciate it quite a bit. It's a decent album. Generally speaking, a good place to start if you're into. If you want to get into progressive rock and Tangerine Dream in general, which they have about 100 albums, I think, at this point, which is just absurd. But it's kind of easy to crank albums out if you're just making sort of ambient music like that. Second album by East of Eden, Snafu. This is a really phenomenal album. It's sort of, I guess, like jazz rock, but they've got a violinist on, so it kind of is pretty similar to Mahavishnu Orchestra, but these guys sort of lean a little bit more heavily into the sort of rock genre. This is just an absolutely fantastic album. I bought this, I think, maybe about 8 years ago off the internet without having hardly heard it. And then when I listened to it for the first time, I listened to it again a second time and then a third time from start to finish. It's that good. It's that fresh. Highly recommended. Another Zappa album. This is 200 Motels. This is the soundtrack to that first movie he made in the early 70s. I've seen the movie. Weird as all hell. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and a lot of times I felt kind of uncomfortable watching it. That being said, the soundtrack is pretty great because, well, Frank Zappa's doing it. So this is pretty cool, I would say. And I think for the longest time this wasn't on any streaming services, but I think only just very recently they put this on Spotify, which is good. Because for a while, this is pretty much the only way I could listen to this album, or I had to go find some tacky uploads on YouTube. Fifth album by King Crimson, Lark's Tongues in Aspic. This is maybe one of my favorites from King Crimson, although I think I like Lizard a little bit better, because I'm just a weird guy. This is a really phenomenal album. There's not much I can say about this album that hasn't already been said, so I'll just put it away. Shake Your Booty by Frank Zappa, or Shake Your Booty, I guess. Double LP from, I think, 1979-ish, or 78. I mean, it's a good album, of course. The guitar work on this is just absolutely spectacular, but it was around this sort of time that Frank Zappa was getting more into the realm of, like, comedy music. And, I mean, like, okay, it might be funny, like, the first 10 times you listen to it, but eventually it sort of loses its sort of humor, and then it's just more of a guitar jam. I'm much more like Frank Zappa stuff from the late 60s, early 70s. But it's still a good album nonetheless. Illusions on a Double Dimple by Triumvirate. This is a fantastic album from Triumvirate. So it's one of those progressive rock albums. So, there's 2 songs on the entire album. They're both 20 minutes, taking up each their own side of the album. It's really great. The best thing that Triumvirate has gone out of their many albums. Then I have H.P. Lovecraft. No real relation to the horror author from Providence, Rhode Island. This is a Chicago band who just, took the author's name. It's kind of I guess like what you might call psychedelic pop, but the real appeal to this album and the band in general is they have these really just insane vocal harmonies. They have this uniquely apocalyptic sound to it that's just so unique, and I haven't ever really heard anything like this from any other band. They made a second album called H.P. Lovecraft 2, which was really, really good. This album, though, is over half the album is just covers, though, whereas their second album is all original material. Still pretty good, but most of the time I just go for their second album. I guess moving on to the next shelf here, I have Ogden's Nut Gone Flake by the Small Faces. Original copies of the album were released in this sort of circular disc here. And I guess this is a certain, U.S. issue from sometime in the mid-'70s, where they were kind enough to provide this sort of like red border so that the album doesn't roll off of my shelf. There's a few different mixes of this album. I think this is probably the U.S. mix. I don't really know the full story with all the mixes of this album. This is another one of those bands that was wildly successful in the UK. I think this album was actually number 1 for 6 weeks in the UK, but it was virtually unheard of here in the US because the band never really toured outside the UK or Europe, as far as I know. Shine On Brightly by Procol Harum, their second album. I think this is a really great album. All the songs in here go down really smoothly, and it sort of ends with this really fantastic 16-minute piece called "And Hell 'Twas an I." Very good album. I think this is kind of underrated in the sense that it sits in the shadow of their first album and their third album, A Salty Dog. That comes highly recommended. The Family That Plays Together by Spirit. A lot of really good songs in this. I think it's got that song, I Got a Line on You, which I believe was sort of like a minor hit. I like their third album a little bit better, The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus, which was a little bit more cohesive. But there's still a lot of really great songs in this, so I like that one a lot. Hatfield and the North's first album. This is a very good album. It's sort of that, Canterbury scene, progressive rock, sort of at the later tail end of that, that scene being most active. This is from 1974. It's kind of a super group of people from, the Canterbury scene. They got Richard Sinclair from Caravan, Phil Miller from Matching Mole, Pip Pyle from Gong, and Dave Stewart from Egg. So it's a pretty stacked lineup here, and the overall flow from song to song is just so fantastic. It's really great. Another one of my favorite albums. We've also got Led Zeppelin 3. This is a reissue. They do the really cool thing with the cover where it's got this sort of spinning wheel here that you can use to change some of the image. Pretty good album from Led Zeppelin, although Led Zeppelin 4 I like a little bit better, of course. Rotary Connection's first album, some psychedelic soul from, I think, 1967. These guys were invited to go to Woodstock, the Woodstock Festival. They ultimately turned it down to attend this other festival in Toronto, which got massively overshadowed by Woodstock. And now not very many people have heard of this band, and I bet they totally regret making that decision. Pretty good album. It's very lush sounding. I don't know. I don't think it's mixed especially well, though. It kind of sounds like there's way too much reverb, and the mix is a little bit clustered. But apart from how it was produced, it's really fantastic. Got Soft Machine 6. Really big fan of Soft Machine. That's a really great album. I've got most of their albums in here. Volume 2 by the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band. So this is, although it's called Volume 2, this is technically their third album because they had an album called Volume 1 that was privately pressed. There's kind of a really crazy story behind this band. You know, there's this, the quote-unquote leader of this band is a guy named Bob Markley, who had an enormous amount of wealth because his dad was like some sort of oil tycoon, and I guess like the story goes that I guess like one day, maybe like 66 or 67, he had the Yardbirds come play at his palatial mansion and somewhere in California, and when he saw how interested the young girls were in the Yardbirds, he said that he wanted to start his own band, and I guess he did. Apart from how shallow the leader is, the music on here is pretty good, I would say, if you're really into psychedelic pop. Got Soft Machine 7. So, record story released from Gong, Live au Bataclan, or however the hell you say it, from 1973. I think this particular live album has been available for quite some time, maybe since the 80s. And it's pretty good. Gong is generally pretty good live. This is a Record Store Day release. It seems like they release something from Gong every year for Record Store Day, which makes me happy because I really do like this band. But it seems like a lot of their releases don't go over very well each Record Store Day, because every time I go into a record store I see a bunch of these records lying around, because people didn't buy them the first time they were, the day they were originally released. The mono issue of A Saucer Full of Secrets, the second album by Pink Floyd, pretty good. The mono edition is, I don't know if I would say it's conclusively better than the stereo version, but it's a lot more punchy sounding, so I sort of appreciate it for that. And you can't listen to the mono version on Spotify, so it's there's some value in owning a copy yourself, I would say. Let's see here. All Things Must Pass, Triple LP by George Harrison. And I think this is probably my favorite Beatles solo album. I even like that third LP with all the sort of guitar jams with George Harrison just jamming out with Eric Clapton and people. It's pretty good. This is a reissue, of course. Got a copy of the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. This is from a TV special that was supposed to be aired, but never saw the light of day until the longest time. So the Rolling Stones put this together. They had a bunch of other bands. They had Jethro Tull before they were super famous. The Who. They do their version of A Quick One While He's Away, which is just really fantastic. Much better than the original album version, if you ask me. They bring in this blues singer, Taj Mahal, who's pretty good, I would say. They have Marianne Faithfull. They have they have John Lennon and Yoko Ono come on, which is pretty nice. Pretty cool to have. I think the reason why the Rolling Stones decided not to air it is because they were very clearly, visibly tired. If you watch the versions, if you watch the footage that's surfaced online, and I think they felt like they were outdone by the Who and some of the other bands that were there, so they just decided to shelf it. because I think they had been awake for maybe like several hours by the time that they actually went on to play because they've been so busy organizing everything. It's also one of the last times that Brian Jones played with the band before he got kicked out. Reissue of Selling England by the Pound by Genesis, classic album. Not much to say about it, apart from the fact that it's really great. Led Zeppelin 4, even more so. I think this is about as close as most bands ever get to making a perfect album. This also is a reissue. The Record Store Day issue of some outtakes from the Bitches Brew session for Miles Davis. I like a lot of the stuff that Miles Davis was doing in the late 60s, early 70s, and there's some really great stuff on this as well. Okay. Some more stuff from the Rolling Stones. I have this sort of a 50th anniversary edition of Their Satanic Majesty's Request with the holographic 3D cover, depending on how you hold it. The positions of the band members sort of change. This is my favorite thing by the Rolling Stones. A lot of people who consider themselves fans of the Rolling Stones tend not to like this because of how wacky and psychedelic it is, but this is right up my alley. Sort of interesting thing they do here. So it's got the gatefold cover with the really fantastic artwork on the inside, and you can sort of unfold it into these 4 panels. Comes with a little booklet where they talk about the album. 2 CDs, one with the stereo and mono mix, and the albums on the inside are also the stereo and mono mix on vinyl. Very cool. I'm glad to have that because it's just not just my favorite Rolling Stones album, but one of my favorite albums in general. Third album from Jefferson Airplane, After Bathing at Baxter's. Super wacky. Very fun. I like it a lot. I like it even a little bit better than their really famous album, Surrealistic Pillow. Glad to own it. The reissue of a Danish band's album, Culpeper's Orchard, self-titled. So this is their first of 3 albums. Very, very great album. Sort of that proto-progressive rock vibe. It's kind of like Dookie by Green Day. It's got that one of those album covers where there's just so much going on. Very fun to look at. I think after they made this album, they went on sort of more of a country and western type of vibe, which is really interesting. Country music from Denmark. Great album. It's another one of those albums where original copies are just stupidly expensive. I've got another reissue. This is Paris 1919 by John Cale. John Cale of Velvet Underground fame. This most critically acclaimed solo album, of which he has several solo albums. Also a 4 Men with Beards reissue, which again, not super reputable as I gather, but again, I haven't listened to that album in a long enough time where I can't really comment on how well it sounds, but the album itself is very good. I have a bootleg from Yes called In the Round. This is the double LP. Despite being a bootleg, it has really fantastic artwork. Probably the only reason I bought it. This is, I think, originally issued in France, and this is from their Tornado tour, and I think this is recorded around 1977. I know Tornado is not one of their best albums, but I think just having it for the artwork alone is worth something. Nadir's Big Chance from Peter Hamill. Peter Hamill being the singer for Vandergraaf Generator. This is a pretty decent album. He tries to put on a sort of a punk facade, so it's pretty interesting. Electrip by Shoal Caravan. Very good album. One of those really kind of a strange, jazz-infused German krautrock bands. They were originally called Soul Caravan when they were making soul music. They made an album under that name, but I think they wanted to switch to more of a jazzy kind of sound, so the word soul was no longer applicable, so they changed the soul to Shoal, XHOL instead. Pretty solid album. It's from 1969. This is, of course, a reissue. Record Store Day, a reissue of The Magician's Birthday by Uriah Heep. I'm not a super big Uriah Heep fan, but this album is definitely one of their better ones. They have the updated artwork from Roger Dean. It's pretty cool. First album by Moby Grape, their self-titled album. Sort of an interesting release history for this album because, well, a whole bunch of stuff going on with the cover. For instance, Don Stevenson, the drummer, you can see he got this past the censors. He's giving you the middle finger right here. In later versions, when they finally caught it, they airbrushed it out. The flag here is also sort of an interesting story. So I think, in Columbia Records, the people who issued this album sort of got cold feet about having the band pose with an American flag in the background. I think they were scared that the band was making some sort of clandestine political message, so they just, turned the flag completely red. But then they realized that they screwed up, and they thought people were going to think this is the Soviet Union flag, so they turned it black in later editions. So it's really, release history behind this album is super crazy. It's a good album nonetheless. I have a triple LP live album, Yes Songs by Yes. This is the album that got me into progressive rock in general. I think I bought this. It would have been 2013. And I was totally hooked on Yes and the genre as a whole after hearing that final song on this album, Starship Trooper. Been a really huge fan of the progressive rock and Yes ever since. This was my introduction to Yes right here. Probably not the best introduction, given that it's a live album, but hey, I mean, at this point, no. Hunky Dory by David Bowie, a reissue. I haven't ever really dived super deep into David Bowie in his discography, but this album is pretty solid. It's got Life on Mars, which is really fantastic song. A reissue of Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. Really fantastic album, although I do like, I'm kind of I have a sort of a general bias towards psychedelic pop, so I like their first album quite a bit better, and I also like The Dark Side of the Moon a little bit better, but this is a really fantastic album here. It just sounds so pristine and clear. I have Who's Next by The Who, classic album. This is again a reissue. I've been listening to this album in The Who for such a long time, and I didn't even realize until recently that, they're all standing next to this sort of monolith thing, and that these marks here along this sort of concrete monolith here, that those are piss stains, and they're all buckling up their pants from after finishing pissing on this sort of weird little concrete thing. I didn't realize that until a few months ago. Here's another really weird and rare album. Rare, not necessarily super sought after, but this is Straight North by Ted Wesley. Sort of like a folky country music from far north in Canada, like the Northwest Territories. This guy was from Yellowknife. This wasn't released outside of Canada, and this as far as I can tell, you can't really even get like MP3s of this online. There's no easily available vinyl rips of this entire album on the internet, although I think you can get some of the songs. Pretty interesting. Second album by Badfinger, No Dice. Kind of basic rock music, but still pretty good at that. British issue of Elton John's first album, Empty Sky. The American issue of this album that they eventually did had a different album cover, and it was kind of sort of lame minimalist art. This is a much better album cover on the British edition. first album by the Velvet Underground and Nico. There's nothing I can say about this album that hasn't already been said. This is in my top 5 for albums. It's got the Andy Warhol artwork, and it's just absolutely fantastic. This is a reissue. On first editions of this album, this banana right here was a sticker, and you could peel it off, and underneath the album cover you could see a picture of the unpeeled banana, which is pretty cool. But no, the banana here is like painted onto the album itself. So very great album. Another album by Amon Düül, not Amon Düül 2, but the original Amon Düül. This is their very first album. Kind of like sort of like what you'd put on as background music. A lot of sort of like freeform guitar playing over sort of like tribalistic drum beatings. Psychedelic Underground, it's called. Sort of an 80s reissue of the live album, quote-unquote live album from the 13th Floor Elevators. And I say quote-unquote live because by this point they had so many lineup changes, and the copyright to their music had gotten so complicated that they couldn't really legally play live. So instead of releasing a live album, what they did is they took some early demos of some of their songs, and they just interspersed applause between each song. And I think the applause actually came from a boxing match of some sort. Pretty cool to have, nonetheless. Sort of a kind of a grotesque album cover here, so maybe you should turn your eyes away if nudity kind of freaks you out. This is Hinton by Guru Guru. This is their second album. A very unsettling album artwork. Even though the album artwork is unsettling, the music on here is really fantastic. Sort of kind of like really psychotic guitar jams. There's a lot of these sort of like kind of like just freeform guitar jam albums just out there. A lot of them are kind of like they're good for background music, but they're not really great to like listen to just to listen to. I like this album a lot. I think it's the best thing that Guru Guru has done. Barring the album artwork. I'm not going to show you the back cover because it's just another picture of a man's ass. And this is a gatefold album cover. I'm not going to show you the inside of it because on the inside it's a picture of a man's scrotum. So, at least as far as I can tell, the image is pretty distorted with like orange haze. So I'm not 100% sure it's a man's scrotum, but I'm pretty sure. First album by Procol Harum with the sort of the U.S. track listing. Pretty good album from Procol Harum. I know that this album has had kind of a complicated history with different versions and different track lists. I think there were at least 3 different track lists of this album, depending on whether you were in Germany, the UK, or the US. So this does, in fact, have their really popular song, A Whiter Shade of Pale, whereas the UK edition did not have that song on here. I guess in the UK, one of the differences between the UK and the US is that in the UK they had a general aversion to putting already released singles onto an album, because I thought, I guess the idea here is that, people would be wasting their money on songs that they already, have, whereas that wasn't really an issue in the UK, or the US, I should say. Another Record Store Day release, compilation of jazz music from Ethiopia. This is a pretty good album if you like jazz music. There was quite a bit of a jazz scene in Addis Ababa back in the 70s, and I think Mulatu Astatke was kind of the big name, but I do think that he was operating out of New York, although he was born in Ethiopia, certainly. Pretty cool Record Store Day compilation. Strands of the Future by Pulsar. It's a French progressive rock band. I don't really like them quite all that much. They were a lot more ambient. I think, if your favorite Pink Floyd song is A Saucer Full of Secrets, then you'll probably really like this band, but it's It's kind of not my thing. It was released on, I guess, this very short-lived record label called Kingdom Records, and unlike a lot of my albums here, this is an original copy, which I didn't have to pay too much for. It's got really fantastic artwork. This is their second album. And I have Mighty Babies' first album, their self-titled album. Maybe one of my favorite pieces of album art ever. It's got some sort of green comic book lizard monster getting disintegrated by some sort of laser ray or something. This is a reissue. Again, original copies of this album from 1969 are super rare, and you have to pay several hundreds of dollars for. But this is I can't remember where I got this reissue from. It's on a reissue label called Barnyard Records, I think. I remember I had this mail order from Australia, but I'm not quite 100% sure that it was actually made in Australia. I might have just bought it from Australia because that was the cheapest way to get it. Not a really huge fan of this album. It's sort of mostly just kind of like straightforward bluesy rock music. And I think probably the last one I'm going to be doing for now is this album by Principal Edwards Magic Theater. This is their second album. The album's called The Asmodo Running Band. It's mostly well known for the fact that it was produced by Nick Mason, the drummer for Pink Floyd. I think this is a really great album. You can find some people on the internet talking about just how lame it is and just how kind of like clunky and awkward it is, and I totally disagree with all of that. This is it is kind of like whimsical British hippie folk music in that sense. Kind of crazy and weird, but I appreciate it for that. This was on John Peel's special record label, Dandelion Records, which was very, very short-lived. This is an original copy, and I think I had to pay quite a bit for this, about $50, to have it mailed from the UK, because this was never released in the US on vinyl. I think that's all I'm going to do for now. Just that first shelf. So I think I'll call it quits there.